Last Pesach, when I addressed the group here at the hotel, I spoke about a very controversial subject. Could we have bombed Auschwitz? At the end of my talk, a lady approached me and said that the only reason why Auschwitz was not bombed is because both FDR and Churchill were anti-Semites and anti-Israel. That is when I decided on my topic for today. I will not at this time comment on FDR, since that can be a topic for another time. But I do want to make a few points about Churchill and the Jews. In the interest of full disclosure, I need to tell you that I have been a member of the Churchill Center Society since 2004. I've been an admirer of Winston Churchill since I received my first publication about him in the mid-1940s. I also remember my mother and other relatives sitting by the radio in Frankfurt during the war listening to Churchill's inspiring words, coming from an illegal radio in our apartment. So you might say I'm a bit prejudiced. I also want to acknowledge the help of Lee Pollock, the executive director of the Churchill Center Society, in preparing for this presentation. Lee has spoken many times on the same subject. I need not tell you what Churchill was to the world during his lifetime. We have all heard of him, particularly those of us who are of European origin. Today, I want to touch on only a very small portion of his personality. He, the greatest orator and politician in modern history, born in 1874 and died in 1965, who towered over the world stage for over 50 years. I want to talk about how Churchill interacted with the Jews and what his attitude was toward the creation of Israel. Sir Martin Gilbert, who wrote the epic official biography of Churchill, tells of a 1969 meeting with General Sir Lewis Spears, a distinguished soldier and historian, and being told by him, "You know, Gilbert, even Churchill had a fault." When questioned, Sir Lewis replied, "Winston was too fond of the Jews." It is this fault that I want to discuss today, since in effect it was a great virtue of a great man. One more word about the Churchill family. Winston's father, Lord Randolph, in the 1870s and 80s, frequently entertained Jews at his home. He was chastised by family and friends for doing so. On one occasion, Randolph was a guest at an English country house and was greeted by his host, a leading aristocrat. "What, Randolph, you have not brought your Jewish friends?" To which Randolph replied, "No, I did not think they would be amused by your company." If I would now attempt to detail everything that is known about Churchill's relationship with the Jews, I would not finish until tomorrow. I will therefore concentrate mostly on that period, which is probably less known to the general public, the years 1900 to 1939. Following his election to the House of Commons in 1900, Churchill found himself increasingly out of step with his own party. In 1904, he crossed the floor of the House and took a seat as a Liberal. As a Liberal Member of Parliament, he found a new constituency in Manchester, in a district where 1/3 was Jewish. There he was called upon to take up an issue, namely the Conservative government's Aliens Bill, aimed at curbing the influx of Jewish immigration fleeing persecution and poverty from Tsarist Russia. One of Churchill's principal supporters in Manchester, Nathan Lasky, a merchant, was president of the Old Hebrew Congregation of Manchester, as well as chairman of the Manchester Jewish Hospital, enlisted Churchill's support to prevent the passage of the bill. Churchill fought against the passage of the bill over a period of several months until the government abandoned it. Churchill had supported the Jews and had prevailed. He had helped forestall legislation which would have prevented large numbers of Jews seeking to enter Britain. Jews who within a few years were to make their contribution to Jewish life in Britain and to its defense in both world wars. Lasky wrote to Churchill, "Pray accept my personal thanks. You have won the gratitude of the whole Jewish community, not only of Manchester, but of the entire country." Unfortunately, Churchill's own Liberal Party introduced its own aliens bill, and it was passed into law in early 1906. It was a significant modification of the Conservative proposal, but it was restrictive nevertheless. Churchill was in a minority even within his own party on matters relating to Jewish immigration. Jews worldwide were outraged at the continuing pogroms in Russia. On December 10, 1905, a public protest meeting was held in Manchester, at which Churchill was the main speaker. He protested to a large audience against the appalling massacres and detestable atrocities recently committed. Among those present on the platform was a Jewish chemist and active Zionist, Dr. Chaim Weizmann, who had come from Geneva to Manchester a year earlier. Born only 3 days apart, he and Churchill were to become closely associated in the evolution of Zionism. In the summer of 1906, Churchill spent his holiday traveling in Europe. His three hosts there, Sir Ernest Cassel, Lionel Rothschild, and Baron Forrest, were all Jews. Back in Britain, Churchill, in his first public meeting, was the main speaker in Manchester in support of the Jewish Hospital Fund. He was impressed with the Jewish communal emphasis on social responsibility. He became a subscriber to the Jewish Soup Kitchen, the Jewish Lads Club, and the Jewish Tennis and Cricket Club. He visited the Jewish Hospital, the Talmud Torah School, and the Jewish Working Men's Club. Afterwards he said, "They have the spirit of their race and faith." He counseled them to guard and keep that spirit as a precious thing, a bond of union, an inspiration, and a source of great strength. In the afternoon, he attended a special service at the Great Synagogue to raise funds for the Victoria Memorial Jewish Hospital. That night, a mass meeting was held in the Palace Theatre in support of the hospital, at which Churchill again was the main speaker. His advice was, if I might say it, without disrespect, be good Jews. A Jew cannot be a good Englishman unless he's a good Jew. The president of the Manchester Zionist Committee and patron of the hospital, Dr. Charles Dreyfus, said that Churchill's name would go down to posterity as one who had endeared himself to the Jews in general, especially those who had been hit by the Aliens Act, against which he had fought so splendid a fight. In 1908, Churchill relocated to Scotland, where he was exposed for the first time to a new movement favoring a national home for the Jewish people, Zionism. Churchill was sympathetic to the goal of a home for the Jewish people, writing, "I am in full sympathy with the historical aspirations of the Jews. The restoration to them of a center of racial and political integrity would be a tremendous event in the history of the world." In 1910, Churchill became Home Secretary, responsible for the preservation of public order. In 1911, Britain had its only pogrom in the mining town of Tredegar, where 30 Jewish families lived, with attacks on Jewish shops. The accusation was that Jewish landlords were demanding invasion of public order. In 1911, Britain had its only pogrom in the mining town of Tredegar, where 30 Jewish families lived, with attacks on Jewish shops. The accusation was that the Jewish landlords were evicting miners from their homes on a large scale for non-payment of rent, and were then taking in lodgers and demanding even higher rents. Actually, only one of the 30 Jewish families derived its income from rents. For 3 days, the Jews were terrorized, their shops and homes were looted. Churchill took immediate action, first with the use of police, and then requesting the War Office to send in troops to successfully stop the outbreaks. Despite severe criticism from both the left and the right for his use of troops, Churchill once again used troops in the Sihawi Valley south of Tredegar when violence against Jews broke out there. From his position of authority, Churchill had acted without hesitation to stamp out violence in Britain against Jews. In November 1917, Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour wrote a letter to Baron Rothschild, a letter now known to us as the Balfour Declaration, expressing a favorable view of the government for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Although Churchill was not directly involved in the issuance of the declaration, in January 1919, the fate of Palestine did become his direct concern when he became Minister of War. Churchill was leery of administering Palestine as a mandate as had been offered to him by the League of Nations. Although broadly sympathetic to Jewish interests as expressed by the Balfour Declaration, he was concerned about the cost of administering the territory and the potential conflict between Jews and Arabs. Churchill suggested an alternative to Prime Minister David Lloyd George, that the proposed mandate be postponed, British forces ultimately withdrawn, and the provinces preserved intact under the direct supervision of the League of Nations. This was rejected by the Prime Minister, and the mandate would go into effect in September 1923. In 1920, Churchill was asked to send a message for a book listing all the Jews who fought and those who were killed in the war. Churchill complied and ended by saying, "I can truthfully say that this record is a great one. And British Jews can look with pride on the honorable part they played in winning the Great War." Meanwhile, Churchill was stuck with Palestine when he became Colonial Secretary in February 1921, responsible for the mandate under a new British High